word of the last episode, John Lunn, aka Johnny Chips. Hello, John. Welcome.
Hi, Mert. How are you doing? You okay?
I am fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very good, very good. Getting ready for Christmas at the moment.
Okay, great. So, before we start, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. So, yeah, hi, everybody. My name's John Lunn, aka Johnny Chips. So, yeah, I'm a technical architect and I work for a company in the UK that some of you may have heard of. It's BT, BT Enterprise in particular. So, my role with BT is really around kind of helping their customers move to the cloud. So, sort of cloud adoption and cloud journeys and cloud transformation. So, yeah, been working with those guys now for probably around about 9 years, 8, 9 years, I think. Yeah, you can catch me on Twitter at Johnny Chips, and there's my LinkedIn URL there, and also my blog, johnnychips.com. Yeah, so really excited to be on the show, Mert.
Okay, thank you very much. So, you are an organizer of Welsh Azure User Group. Can you tell me about your community contributions?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I guess probably about sort of 4 or 5 months ago now, I was kind of looking for a community user group in the area, whether it be around cloud or whether it be around Microsoft Azure specifically. And there were some great groups around, don't get me wrong, but they weren't really focused on sort of cloud specifically. So I reached out on LinkedIn, got in touch with a few really great people that you can see there on the slide, and some sort of involvement from Microsoft themselves as well. So the Welsh Azure user group kind of formulated from I think it was an old SQL meetup that went through a bit of a Microsoft stack meetup, and it's now been transformed into the Welsh Azure user group. And yeah, probably my involvement with the guys has been since about September time, so just before September, I think. So I think September was the first meetup that I organised with them, and we had our most recent meetup only last week, and that was a great one with Abel Wang and April Edwards. So yeah, I think the idea is, at the moment we're all kind of stuck in lockdown or working remotely. So I think a lot of virtual meetups have kind of sprung up across not just the UK, but obviously globally. So I think, yeah, we're just trying to do our little bit for the community in Wales, which is obviously where I'm living at the moment.
Okay, great. So, I am following your 100 Days of Cloud challenge for a long time,
Okay,
and I
yeah.
have to say it goes really well. So, can you give me some details? What is 100 Days of Cloud?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's a good question, to be honest, because I mean, if you've been following my Twitter and what I've been doing over the last few months, I think when we hit COVID, 100 Days of Cloud for me answered a lot of different questions that kind of came at once. So it's difficult for me to kind of put a specific answer on it. But what the 100 Days of Cloud community actually is fundamentally it's a platform that you can get involved with, and the basic principle is that you will do your best to learn something about cloud for 100 days. Doesn't have to be consecutive. I mean, that's great if you can do it consecutive, but I mean, personally, I try and take a weekend where I'm focused on the family and things like that, and obviously the odd jobs around the house. But I think what the 100 Days of Cloud is, it was set up by a few core members, and you sign up. You can see this is just a pull from their website. But at the time when I was looking to do something, I was kind of looking to branch out into a little bit of community work myself, putting a little bit back to the community, knowing full well that as an IT professional, I needed to learn a lot of things. Yeah, I think it's the same for everybody. We kind of, over the last few years, probably, we've all been sat here thinking, right, where is the industry going? There's so much to learn. This, as Microsoft call it, tech intensity. There's so much going on. Where do you start? So, like I say, with wanting to reach out to the community, knowing that I need to focus a lot on my learning and broaden my horizons with my current specialisms at the minute, 100 Days of Cloud kind of ticked a number of boxes. So basically, I use it as a mechanism to kind of get me, back into the art of blogging and kind of discussing what I was learning, and to help me try and practice the art of maybe writing a blog or using YouTube or building up some form of, community content. And I think I'm on day 90 now. Day 90 is today. So Mert, I'll be no doubt writing up today about MSHOWTOLIVE. But I think the thing about 100 Days of Cloud that did it for me is it's very personal to you as an individual. So the idea is that there are lots of people that are either novices, just starting out their cloud journey, and there's absolutely sort of seasoned veterans, consultants and architects that have been doing the job for years. But you all recognize that there's always something else to learn. So I mean, the pathway that I kind of started off with has kind of stayed true to a point, but it's taken me in so many different directions. It's been quite a fun and interesting thing. And part of it is that you do blog, you do put it out on Twitter, on LinkedIn, just to say, look, I'm on day 89 or 90, and this is basically what I'm doing or what I've done or what I'm going to do. And I've used it as a bit of a mix, almost like a bit of a diary, a bit of a pathway for where I'm going as an individual, a few things that I've learned. I thought, well, I'll do a quick blog about that. So, I mean, look up the guys. I mean, if you sign up to it, you can get onto a Discord group where there's basically a huge community of people. I'm not sure the numbers, but I know there's quite a few hundred people doing this challenge at any moment in time. And the support that you get, and kind of the encouragement that you get, and I do my best to put a little bit back into that as well, is phenomenal, and it really kind of inspires you and moves you forward. And I think one of the key things for me as an individual was that when I was first kind of thinking of things, I'd use Git, I'd use a little bit DevOps, only dabbling and playing, because I'm primarily an operations guy. I did a little bit of dev work back in the day, as they say, but certainly over the last, sort of 7-8 years, I've been pretty much ops focused more often than not. And, Git and coding and DevOps and pipelines, they were all relatively new terms that I really started looking in probably about a year, 18 months ago. But I thought, well, I need to learn a lot more about it. So part of 100 Days of Cloud is that they set you up with essentially a GitHub repo, if I look at the right repo. So, it kind of gets you into the art of trying to use Git on a daily basis by simply, a simple template. And anyway, you can follow along with what I've been up to, my ramblings over the last few months, where you just put a link to something that you're doing. So, on this particular day, I started looking at something on DevOps, and I got a link to my Twitter post, my LinkedIn, and then off to my blog post. So it really is, getting you to start using sort of GitHub and Git and VS Code. I do all this in VS Code, and just it's like anything. You start to use something more and more, you get good at it eventually, and you understand the terms of it better. So yeah, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, Mert, and you understand what that was all about.
Yes, I have some questions.
Yeah,
So
sure.
is that vendor specific or multi-cloud?
No, not at all. It's multi-cloud. So yeah, you've got, and to be honest, part of my journey, no doubt I will be branching over far more into AWS. I'm very Azure focused personally at the moment. But no, the community is very much multi-cloud. So, the prominent 3 clouds, but there's all the other clouds are on there as well. So, predominantly it's AWS, Azure, G Cloud, but I think there's Alibaba on there. There's a few others. So, yeah, if there's anything cloud, if it's not in there, have a chat with the moderators and the organizers, and they'll set you up some areas. They'll help you get started, and you can form the basis of that cloud if there's not a lot of content in there.
Okay. My other question is, if I start this cloud challenge, should I do it every day, or I can pass some days and continue with where I left?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, personally, I use it as a little bit of an intensive thing, really, to try and commit myself to something that was going to be a challenge, and really, persevere at trying to be as regular as I possibly could be. But absolutely, there's no hard and fast rule that says you have to do this. This is about you as an individual, or anybody as an individual, setting yourself some goals, doing it at the pace that you want to do it at and that is comfortable for you. Because I have family, and like I said to you earlier, I try and keep the weekends as free as possible so that I can spend a little bit of time with the family and obviously do all of those kind of things. But yeah, there's nothing stating you need to do this as consecutive days. You just do it at the pace that feels right for you, I guess.
Okay. So before we start our actual topic, I want to say that you have a very nice T-shirt, and
Yes,
I want to say hello to the Azure's live team if they
absolutely.
are watching us today.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's begin then. So there are lots of ops nowadays, DevOps, DevSecOps, and other ops, GitOps, for example. So what is AzOps?
Yeah, okay. Best place to start then. So AzOps, Azure Ops is, I suppose there's a few different ways of looking at this, but I think the technical term of AzOps, if I quickly flick to a Git repo before, I've got a few slides, Mert, that I'll just set the scene with in a second, but
Okay.
specifically looking at AzOps, the concept of enterprise scale, which we'll get to in a second. But what the Microsoft guys have done is that they've developed this sort of GitHub repo, which is essentially, I mean, they've named it Azure AzOps, and essentially what this repo contains is a containerized set of it's a container that runs a set of commands, a bit like you would do as a CI/CD pipeline, but it works on GitHub Actions essentially. So what they've done is they've built in this containerized package of actions and sequences and tasks to actually do an extract from your existing sort of Azure tenant and subscriptions. Take an extract of all the configuration that you've got in there, pull it out and store it in another GitHub repository. And this, I suppose this container, this thing that does this work is effectively technically what you can refer to as AzOps. Is that concept of not having to just simply deploy an ARM template, but you could effectively put a series of ARM templates in situ and commit them into a GitHub repo and have a GitHub action kick off that deployment into your Azure tenant, if that makes sense. So straight off the bat, Microsoft have got this GitHub repo, Azure AzOps, and there's a couple of different sort of, they call them tenants that they refer to. We're going to focus on this one today. So effectively to clone sort of like a baseline repository that has got all of these GitHub actions set up, ready and waiting to go, and then we'll use that to hook into our tenants. So that's what I'm going to take you through today. But there are another couple of scenarios that you can use that, and one of these things about if you've got an Azure brownfield configuration that has kind of grown organically over time, you can absolutely come in and run this and kind of get an extract of the configuration itself just to really understand where you are. And then if there is any kind of configuration drift, so say an IT team isn't quite up with running sort of code changes or ARM template changes and committing them to a Git repo, you can use it to kind of capture that configuration drift. So if somebody goes into the portal and manually changes something, you can let this run and have it report back out to you what changes have been made to a tenant. But like I say, I'm going to focus on the first one to begin with today. But does that make a little bit of sense? So I guess in the terms of ops, AzOps is the concept of making your Azure tenant and your Azure set of subscriptions in that automated way, essentially. So helping manage it in an automated fashion using coding and GitHub repos, essentially.
Okay, thank you. So what is that landing zone actually?
Yeah. Okay. Let's kick into it then, Mert. So I mean, I'll throw a couple of slides on the screen just to kind of set the scene. But essentially, where landing zones come from, just to kind of say it succinctly at the start of this, is that a landing zone is an area or a configuration that you would have in your Azure tenant that is ready and waiting for you as an organization to start doing something with it. So it's things like setting up a standard VNet that you're going to attach a bunch of VMs to. It's like maybe you want to put a log analytics workspace in there and have all of your monitoring automatically applied and being put into that log analytics workspace. So it's setting up that set of tooling and resources that you can then reuse and scale and move forward with, essentially. That's what a landing zone is. But in the concept, under the idea of where has it come from and why is it a requirement, it very much, from a Microsoft point of view, has its roots in what's known as a cloud adoption framework. So the idea behind the cloud adoption framework is realizing that we want to try and deploy. We want to try and deploy quickly, and we want to be productive, but we don't want to do that in a an ad hoc way and something that is quite risky towards a business. So we still want to keep these sort of controls in place and keep a stable platform, but we want to keep some of the speed and the return on the results that we can as well. So it's cloud adoption framework is very much finding that balance with the governance side of things and still being quick to market, if that makes sense, Mert.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to quickly show this, that the cloud adoption framework is made up of these relevant gates, essentially, where you define a strategy, you have a plan, you get to this ready stage and this adopt stage. Now, you could spend a good few hours talking about these, and to be honest, if you go to this URL here, there's some absolutely fantastic collateral that Microsoft have put aside. So it's a set of defined best practices and sort of baselines and information and tools that Microsoft have worked with their customers and partners over the last few years, and they kind of developed them into a ready-made set of guidance principles, I guess. But where Landing Zone sits in this, it sits very much under the ready phase. So, I mean, we're going to drill down into this. So there's effectively two things that sit under, two prominent things that sit under the ready. It's basically getting your people ready to move to the cloud. So if you imagine, if you're a brand new organization and you're taking your first step into Azure, you need the people around you skilled up. They need to know what Azure is. They need to know what to expect, how to deploy things, what they're deploying, how to manage and optimize. There's a myriad of things, as we know, that people need to be skilled up on. So that is very much the first part of ready. The second part is this thing called landing zones. So the idea that we get our tenant ready to start receiving whatever it is we need to create or migrate or develop. So we need to define this area called a landing zone. Yeah, does that make sense, Mert? So effectively, that's what we get from there.
Okay, today we are going to talk about the enterprise scale landing zones, but I wonder, what do you mean by enterprise scale? Are there any other scales?
Yeah, really good question, actually, Mert.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me see if I can. I don't know if I've got a little website on that one here. Let me see. Okay, let me flick on. What I'll do, I'll flick on a couple of slides here, Mert, and I'll come back to. So, brilliant question. And the answer is no, enterprise scale isn't the only option that you've got. I think up to now, where enterprise scale has come from is this idea that we kind of, I'll use a little bit of a cliche phrase, but we democratize the idea of a subscription. So I think in my experience, and maybe not everybody's experience, but certainly in my experience, the subscription has kind of been king over the last few years. And the subscription has always been seen as this, again, this is only my opinion, but this holy grail of we must put everything in one subscription. And that is very much true. If you want to start, if you're a small organization, maybe you've got a centralized operations team, maybe you're a small centralized operations team that kind of, it kind of makes sense maybe to have a single subscription and grow from it. So you can start putting your resource groups and your other Azure objects and resources into this single subscription. But one of the key things for me is that enterprise scale kind of democratizes that. It kind of splits up that idea that you might not just want one subscription. You might split that across multiple resource groups or other things. I'm not going to read into this slide too much, Matt. I put it there on the screen. And again, this is all available on the Cloud Adoption Framework website. But I guess one of the key things for me is what enterprise scale is about is that you've really got to try and understand what your cloud operating model looks like at the moment. So at the one extreme, like we just said, do you have a decentralized sort of operation? So essentially, you've got maybe it's a small IT team that's responsible, maybe for just a few apps. Well, great. Clearly you can start small. You don't necessarily need to go into this whole enterprise scale that I'm about to show. But if you're the other end of the scale and you've got sort of distributed operations that may be nationally, it may be globally, where you've got teams of people working on different platforms, running different applications in different zones, time zones, regions. Clearly, if that's the case, this is where enterprise scale is probably going to be a good fit for your organization. And of course, you've got that middle ground where there's various sort of things you might want to ask yourself as a company. And again, some of the guidance for that, check out the Cloud Adoption Framework, because there's some really good guidance with when might you want to choose one over the other. And absolutely. So it's a really good question. But in short, the answer is no, you don't have to use enterprise scale. There's certainly some great best practices that you could take from enterprise scale, even if you are a small organization. But equally, they may not necessarily be best practices for your organization. So it's not enterprise scale isn't about coming in and saying you must work this way. I suppose what enterprise scale is showing is that there's a set of defined, and I think these have all been ratified by the Microsoft engineering teams as a set of best practices with how you might want to kind of carve up and distribute your workloads for your organization, and how you might manage them moving forward. So I think that's what we're going to dip into. Have you got any other questions at that stage, Mert, before I start to dip into it a bit deeper?
Yes, I am not an expert of this topic, but as I can understand, it is about Azure governance and policy. So can you describe what governance and policy are?
Yeah, 1 second again. Let me see if I got some slides. No, if I got some slides. No. So, okay. So Azure governance is all about setting your organization up for the best possible experience on a number of levels as you possibly could have. So straight away, enterprise scale relies on this thing called Azure management groups. So the ability to split your organization into various groups. Now, those groups can contain various other artifacts in there. So they can contain subscriptions, they can contain policy, they can contain things like resource groups and how your resources in Azure are spread across them. Now, the concept of putting governance in play is enterprise is very much about Azure policy-based governance and also applying RBAC at the most appropriate level to make sure that things like, moving forward, things like cost optimization is kind of baked in almost to your deployment. Security is paramount, is baked in, and you've got the appropriate governance structures in place, regardless if you've given access to a particular dev team or operations team to allow them to spin up their own resources. Whatever it may be, you can put this governance in place at the management group using Azure Policy to say, I will allow X to happen, however, under these circumstances. Yeah, so that can happen, but then you've effectively set up your organization for the better, so that a dev team or an ops team can't just spin up a bunch of resources and leave that running, regardless, and pushing your costs through the roof. You've got an actual decent way of governing that and managing that going forward. So, like I say, enterprise scale relies very heavily on Azure Policy and management groups to deploy this. So it's about making sure that you distribute your organization appropriately. And we'll look at a few examples in a second. And then you apply the appropriate policy on top of that and the appropriate RBAC policies to either the subscriptions or the resource groups that those management groups may contain. Does that make sense, Mert?
Yes, perfect. So before your demo, I have a question about the ops term in AzOps. I believe it contains automation, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Fundamentally, that's right.
Okay, so can I use Azure DevOps?
That's a good question. And to be honest, I had a chat with somebody else about that not long ago. Now, my understanding is that this container was developed specifically with GitHub Actions in mind. However, recently, I do believe Microsoft have put in some information in the bear with me 1 second. There we go. No, that's my demo. I believe if we look at the enterprise scale landing zone area or enterprise scale area under Azure, there is some information in there about how you can deploy it with Azure DevOps. So I believe somebody has developed a way of deploying this container into kind of CI/CD pipelines within DevOps. So I'll see if I can dig that out, Mert, and maybe send you over the link. But there is definitely some information on that. But I think it was very much designed specifically for use with GitHub Actions. But I believe there is a way to extract that and get that set up in Azure DevOps.
Okay, thank you. So I am very excited to see your demo.
Yeah. No problem. Let's have a little look then. So I'll run through the last 1 or 2 slides just to kind of finish off setting that scene.
Okay.
But I'm not going to dwell on these slides too much. But fundamentally, enterprise scale, as we've already kind of talked about, there is one way of looking to get a set of landing zones or a landing zone set up into your Azure tenant. It's going to be based on specific design principles. Again, if you look at the Cloud Adoption Framework, these are all very well spelled out. In fact, if I come out of that and have a little look on the website itself, under Cloud Adoption Framework, if you do aka.ms/adopt, it'll take you to this page. So, I mean, we're looking at the ready stage. This is where we'll find stuff around Azure landing zones. So if we click into Azure landing zones, you can see, I mean, that the information that you get in there is very comprehensive. So these are the 2 ways that we just talked about. So starting with enterprise scale, starting small and expand, you can see that design principles, if we drill into that, we can get a really good idea as to, well, okay, great. That's great to know that there are some design principles, but actually what do they mean? So I'm not going to dwell on these for now. I'm going to jump straight into a little bit of a demo and talk through how you can, get this Azure AzOps set up and start having a little play with it. But I would urge any viewers to really jump into this Cloud Adoption Framework and have a read through, because there's some really great sort of guidance in there. And just to kind of focus in on, so when we look at using landing zones for enterprise scale, what we're really drilling into from these critical design areas is the concept of using management groups and subscriptions within your organization as a way to offer sort of this control and governance to your organization. So on that note, let's try and jump straight in then, Mert. So I think, really speaking, what we've got, the concept that we've got is that I'm logged into my Azure tenant here. And what I've done, I've got a few subscriptions set up. I mean, I've labeled them C, L, Z, and M. I mean, basically what these are meant to mean are M for management, landing zone is obviously LZ, and C is configuration. So it could be anything that you need to configure your organization. That's what I've got at the minute. So if you imagine that within my Azure environment, I've got nothing other than 3 subscriptions. There is some stuff in these subscriptions, but I'm not going to dwell on that too much. It's not relevant to this little demo. But let's turn our attention now to, okay, enterprise scale. Where can I find some information out? Well, it's all really being constructed in terms of GitHub repos. So if we browse to Azure/enterprise scale, do you remember on this GitHub repo, the first option that we looked at was really to clone a repository, and we'll use that to deploy into our own organization. So that's exactly what I've done. So effectively, we've got this enterprise scale GitHub repo from Azure, and I've cloned this into my own area. So I've cloned it under Johnny Chip's enterprise scale. So, I mean, I'll use this one. I'm going to show you this one because it's got a few updated pictures on it, because when I cloned this a few months back, obviously there's been slight disjoints. I didn't fork it. So I'll show you this one. But just to get the kind of idea, is what this GitHub repo is showing us is really, without reading all the words off there, it gives us these 3 example enterprise scale sort of architectures that we can use to either have a look and a play and just find our feet with it, or you can actually use these in anger for real world deployments. So just for the purposes of the one that I've got deployed at the moment, and the reason I'm not deploying it from here is that it takes about 5 or 6 minutes to deploy, depending on what you turn on or off. But if I click on this detailed description, basically Microsoft have set you up with 3 kind of reference deployments. One is a very basic one. The next one is this, which is like a hub and spoke deployment. And the third one is very similar to this, but using Azure vWAN. Now, what this is showing us, Mert, is this concept that we've got these things called management groups, okay? So they're demarked here by, we've got a tenant root group, we've got our company group. We may then split that into landing zones and platform. And if we drill down into platform, we've got this thing called identity, connectivity, and management. So, you know, if you remember, I had one called M for management, C for connectivity, LZ, I had up here. So I've only got 3 subscriptions. And on this diagram, you can see that the subscription is demarked by this key symbol. So what we're saying is that we've got this management group here has got a management subscription. And that management subscription has basically got Monitor and Security Center enabled and turned on by default. It's got a couple of resource groups. And we can see that we've got a storage account, a key vault, and some log analytics workspaces set up under this management subscription, which is great. Now, remember, at this management group level, this is where we can set our governance policy. So our Azure policy, we can set RBAC permissions to allow certain, users to have certain rights on these subscriptions or resource groups. And likewise, if we look at the connectivity area, we've got everything you can think of, in terms of, your connectivity. Now, out of the box, you can set this up by clicking certain radio buttons and turning things on or off and deploying things. But you can also remember, you can also deploy and design your own landing zone for your business that's very bespoke, if that's in fact what you absolutely needed to do. So if again, I'm not going to dwell too much on every little aspect of this, but the prime concepts of landing zones are that we now democratize these subscription items and we split them out into their own management groups. Now, I believe off the top of my head, I think this group structure can be no more than 6 levels deep. And I know there's an upper limit, but I think it's, don't quote me on it, I think it's quite a few thousand, if I'm remembering correctly, management groups. But I guess, you want to try and keep this relevant to your business. And like I say, this is a demo that I've deployed into my tenant. And just to kind of show you what that demo looks like, if we click on Deploy to Azure, I'm logged in with my account. It's really just an ARM template that's going to take us through a few point and clicks. So I'm going to, I'm not going to deploy this, but I'll just take you through just so that you can get a bit of an idea as to kind of things that we want to get out of here. So first thing we want to do is, right, where are we going to be deploying this? So select your location. You've got this concept of adding, so this might be, well, you can see for our demo, I've created something called Johnny, but this could be company name. Yeah, so this is just a management group prefix. So before the names of the management groups get deployed, it'll put your company name before it. So, just as we saw with that, if I go back to this diagram quickly. So it'll be deploying these management groups, but it'll have, like in our example, it would have, this would be called Johnny, then we'd have Johnny-landing zones, Johnny-platform, and so on and so forth. So it gives us an idea that we can, and well, there we go, it can only be 5 characters, so we want to put in there. Next, this is where we get into the real sort of configuration of our sort of the deployment of a landing zone. It asks us a whole series of questions, and like I say, this can absolutely be used in production for any organization, or it can be modified and adapted specifically for your business or company. But things like, do we want to deploy the agent health solution? So all this is doing is including various different ARM templates behind the scenes and we're saying yes or no. So when it's deploying specific things like this, it makes great sense to just deploy them and have a little look around and see what actually we get from it. But there's all sorts of things down here. Think, right the way through that to, do I want to deploy an Azure Sentinel? And then we can use policy to make sure that all of our sort of integration with our Azure resources are all being, signals, metrics, and logs are all being sent to a centralized log analytics workspace that Sentinel has access to. Such a powerful set of policies, essentially. So, I mean, if we click on next, we can say, yeah, okay, I want to deploy a virtual hub. Let's select my connectivity subscription. So I select my connectivity subscription. I type in my address space if I wanted to deploy that. Where do I want to set up my first network hub? So if you've got this connectivity management group, say, you were based in the US, but you wanted to deploy it from the UK, you can absolutely do that by selecting the most appropriate location, as you'd expect. Do I want to deploy a VPN gateway? Well, we know if we deploy that now, that will take a long time. I haven't deployed one in my demo, but that's not to say that you couldn't say, yes, I want that, and then go in and set create all the various routing bits and pieces for that. Have you got an express route? Do you want to deploy that? Do you want to deploy Azure Firewall? So you can see that from a connectivity perspective, there's this quite comprehensive set of things that we can deploy. We move on to identity. So if you've got a separate subscription for identity, in my case, I don't. But I might just want to use my management subscription to store all this. And it's around what do we want to do? So with it being identity, we may have a couple of domain controllers in IaaS. We may be using Azure Active Directory domain services. It could be any of those kind of things. But we might be using third-party IAM sort of tools and functions that we might want to store in that subscription. The point is, we've got some things that we can now do to that if we wanted to. And then finally, when it comes down to, if you remember that we had this concept within this demo, where the concept of an online landing zone and we had a corp landing zone. That I suppose you could look at that in two ways. That's almost like the traditional DMZ and corporate areas. Obviously, it's different, but just to try and get a bit of an idea. So we could say, right, okay, online, I'm going to drop this subscription as to my online. You might have, various other. In this demo area, I've got 3 subscriptions, and then we're asked another series of questions. Do we want to, prevent RDP from the internet? These are kind of all. Essentially, these are built-in. There's a lot of built-in policies that are just being applied to this. There's quite a lot of custom policy as well that is being applied to it. But the bottom line is, this is just an ARM template that we can deploy. We can click review and create, and Azure will go off, deploy this as a single ARM template, and we're left with essentially. Like I said, I'm not going to click create on that one because it'll just take a little bit too long. But we're effectively left with, if I go to my management group structure, I've got this management group now called Johnny. Now, underneath Johnny, you can see that I've got another subset of management groups, decommissioned, landing zones, platform, and sandboxes. These could equally refer to anything that's very specific to your company. So, for example, if I click under landing zones, I've got my corp and I've got my online. And if I go to corp, then, okay, that's the end of the line. There's no more management groups under there. Right, okay, so I've got my structure of management groups. So I've got that all contained, a bit like we saw in that picture earlier. So I've got all of these management groups deployed now in my Azure environment. So what has that template just done now in terms of policy? It's clearly it's deployed some kind of a policy or set of policies. So the next thing we can do is, if we click on Azure Policy, just do a quick search up in our bar at the top there, find policy. The first thing that we can see. So if you're not familiar with policy, the easiest thing that I kind of split this down into is that within this window here, to look at it through the Azure portal, you've got 2 things. Policies are made up of fundamentally 2 things. These things called definitions, of which definition types can be initiatives, which are groups of definitions or individual policies. So for the simple nature of what we're talking about at the moment, if we assume that a definition can be as an individual policy, and these policies come in 2 flavors. So there's either built-in policies, which are native within Azure as it stands. So we can see that if I search for policy, built-in policy, I've got this raft of things that I could possibly apply to my management groups on my subscriptions. And, just picking on something at random here, but we could say a maximum of 3 owners should be designated for your subscription. That's a great security policy. And, that could very well relate to an industry or regulatory compliance requirement as well. And I'll try not to touch on those too much at this point, but there are answers. Microsoft have created sort of these things called blueprints where they're based on regulatory compliance requirements as well. So they're well worth looking into. But for now, let's keep this simple. We know that policies they contain two things. One of them is a definition, which we're seeing lots of built-in definitions. The other type of policy is a custom policy, where, as you would can imagine, custom policies can be defined that by as much as your imagination will fill you. They're defined as an ARM template, so a JSON format file, and we'll have a look at some of those in a second. So we've got built-in or custom policies, definitions, and the other aspect to policy is these things called assignments. So, right, we've got what we want to do. Now we have to assign it somewhere. So you've got this concept that you've got a policy assignment. So a policy assignment can be put at the management group level. It can be put at the subscription level. So if we go in here and just have a quick look at, we'll focus in on an area. Let's focus in on Johnny Corp, for argument's sake. If I focus there, I can see that from a policy perspective, I've got 16 policies defined at the Johnny Corp level, or that are being applied to that Johnny Corp level. So if I just sort by scope, I can see that 4 policies are being assigned at the top level parent folder. Then I've got this thing called allow locations at Johnny Corp, and then Johnny landing zones. I've got another bunch of policies. So it's like, okay, and that's great. And I can click through here and do filters and search and modify and change as much, to my heart's content. I can do as much of that as possible. Now, this is the interesting point now where this AzOps terms comes in, because remember, we've got this container that's actually going to run, not from this GitHub repo, but remember, I've cloned my GitHub repo here, and I've got the ability now. Now, there are a few other steps that you've got to go through in terms of going to settings and getting your so there's some security things that you've got to run through to implement your sort of attachment to your Azure AD, your Azure tenant. Again, I'm going to skip over those, but if you click on some of these links here, you'll find all of the information that you need to run through. In fact, if you run through this as a bit of an example, it will get you somewhere quite close to where we're looking at the moment. But part of that is you have to hook up your GitHub repo to be able to talk and communicate securely to your Azure AD and your Azure tenants and subscriptions. So yeah, where was I? So we were looking at those policies, and we know that we can click and point and change and modify as much as we like. Now, as part of cloning this environment, we get a few actions, so GitHub actions that are set for us. We've got this one called AzOps pull, where you can see that it's set on a timer. I've run it a couple of times before this meeting just to make sure it was running okay. But you can see it on average, it's set to run every sort of few hours. I think it's every 5 hours by default. It looks like it's set to run. But if we click on one of those, things should start to become familiar. If you're familiar with things like DevOps and CI/CD pipelines, this is no different. That we've got this concept of a build, which we can drill into and understand. So remember, this is what's been built by Microsoft themselves. And then we've got this thing called a pull, so as a GitHub action. And what this pull set of jobs or set of steps and actions is doing is literally dropping into my Azure environment, pulling out all the configuration, and then it's storing that configuration in this folder called AzOps within my GitHub repo, which is great, because now all of a sudden, what I think I've got is I've got a bunch of stuff. Well, Johnny, that looks familiar. So I click on Johnny. Okay, these are looking familiar now. This is decommissioned landing zones. So let me click on landing zone. Yeah, I know what that Johnny Corp is and Johnny Online. So if I click on that, okay, I got this thing called a policy assignment here. Okay, well, so just clicking around, I can start to see that I've actually got things that look meaningful within my GitHub repo, which is great, at the end of the day. So what can I do with that? So the idea is that now what this has actually done for me is it's pulled all of those management groups, those subscriptions, those policy definitions out into my GitHub repo. And Let me see if I can pick on one that we saw in, I did set one up. So if I allowed locations for argument's sake, I think that was the one that I set up. Yeah, we go. So demo for MSHOWTOLIVE. So I just picked on one by, by sort of a random act effectively. Now, what this allowed locations is actually doing, if we click on it, is it's allowing us to only use a set of locations within our within the subscriptions contained at the management group where this policy is set. So let's just remind ourselves where this policy is set. It's set at the Johnny-Corp level. Yeah. So if I click on there and click on the parameters, I can see that I'm allowed 6 locations. So under the Johnny Corp, I can deploy to East US, East US 2, Europe, UK South, West US, US 2. Okay, so I got 6 locations. So let's jump over to our enterprise scale and make sure I get the same location. So policy assignments. Okay, this is looking good. There's my demo for MSHOWTOLIVE. And okay, list of allowed locations. There we go. I've got my 6 locations there. So straight away, I'm thinking, okay, so now I've got the ability. Now, remember, if you're in that distributed kind of cloud operating model where you've got teams of people working on your environment, that you don't necessarily want people to go into the portal and start clicking and changing things, albeit things are logged quite well, and you can set up alerts and things like that. Wouldn't it be nice if you could control all of that configuration in the same way that your company might be doing for infrastructure as code deployments for other stuff that they may be putting into Azure or other cloud providers? So that's what AzOps has actually given us. So by way of a quick little demonstration, remember, this is a policy assignment. So I've got my policy definition, which is basically saying you can only use these locations. And this is the JSON file that's actually going to assign that. So say I actually wanted to update that. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I wanted to add in UK West as another location. Now, this is where the demo gods go wrong and things start breaking. But the general principle is that I could just, for argument's sake, copy that, paste that there, and change that to UK West. And okay, I've just modified a file. Now, I happen to be in GitHub modifying that file, but equally I could be using my VS Code here, which I've got, the same. I'm looking at the same file that I've cloned the repo onto my local machine. But just for the ease of showing how this can be used through GitHub, I've just changed that. Now, the mechanism that GitHub Actions uses is that we it's like anything. You don't want to commit directly to the main branch. So we would create a separate branch. So maybe I create a branch called add UK West, maybe. I could put a few bits and pieces in here. So add UK West to my commit message, ensure I can deploy to, if I could type properly. And I'll propose that change. So there we go. What it's now actually saying is, well, okay, let's create a pull request. I can update that in whatever way I like, as I normally may be doing for other areas of my business. I'll say, okay, let's create that pull request. And now what's going to happen behind the scenes is that I haven't merged this pull request just yet, but in a second, there we go. This is actually tying into the AzOps, that container in the background of this GitHub repo, and it's pushing off some, let's go and do some work. Okay, so we can leave that pull request there a second, and for the purposes of what's going on, we can click over to see, well, okay, let's see what this push is doing. Much in the same way as you might do for any sort of other DevOps CI/CD pipeline. I think this takes about a minute and a half, 2 minutes to run the last couple of times that I've done it. And like I say, the demo gods need to be with me today, because occasionally I've had this fail for silly little things, mainly my own doing. But if we just stick with this for the time being, so we'll try and review what I've done there. So I've deployed my enterprise scale landing zone into my Azure tenant. I've got 3 subscriptions. I've got a whole bunch of management groups, and those subscriptions are sat in a few of the different management groups. I've identified a single policy with one assignment on a very specific management group that controls my, my corp environment in theory. And I've noticed that one of the policies, the governance, was saying, okay, you can deploy things into the subscriptions of this management group, but you cannot deploy anything outside of that 5 or 6 regions that were listed in there, which is great. So now I've gone into my GitHub repo using GitHub and the standard pull request mechanism and branching mechanism that you would be using for anything else. I've now created a pull request to update a JSON file, which is an ARM template file, to add this additional location called UK West. So in other words, I've allowed now people in my corporate environment the ability to use UK West as another data center within Azure, which, you can imagine that the whole world of what you can and can't do is completely at your sort of disposal. But the key things here are that I'm able to use the same tooling in theory, or the same process in that DevOps mentality, so that I can control and log and roll back from and audit all of these changes in as a secure way as possible. So in a second, I'm hoping that this will finish off. Yeah, it takes, like I say, it's about a minute or 2. So I'm expecting that, fingers crossed, to finish off in a second. And, I guess that the whole point of this is, okay, if we've deployed this, if you think about deploying an ARM template with Azure generally, I mean, okay, arguably you can do it through the portal. You could use, sort of the Cloud CLI, a couple of PowerShell commands, upload your JSON ARM template with a parameters file maybe, and you deployed it. But, you've not got that audit trail. You've not got that ability to reflect on actually what you've done using AzOps in this way. And at that stage, now I'm getting nervous that this is taking a little bit longer than I'd imagine. Warning. Okay, yeah, that's fine. So, yeah, I think it's just the general speed of things. So we'll leave that. Have you got any questions, Mert, at this stage, whilst we're waiting for that to kind of finish off? Does that all make sense? Did all that kind of, before we hit reveal and see that it's actually updated it in our portal?
Oh, I think it's a great demo, and thank you for this presentation and the demo. While we are waiting, I want to ask my classic questions, and this is a very classic MSHOWTOLIVE question. What challenges may I face when deploying an enterprise scale landing zone?
To be honest, I think the biggest challenges that you'll face within any business now, and to be honest, these are the conversations I get in with the companies that I help, are really that learning, that understanding what the art of the possible is. For a lot of people, and still a lot of IT people out there, if they're relatively new to the cloud, it's that whole concept of, okay, I understand that. And, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to dwell on what this reminds you of or what it can, but it relates to lots of things over the years. But the biggest thing that I found with my customers is that the whole concept of what can I do? What can't I do? What are the best practices? And I guess that's what this GitHub repo is there to kind of hopefully illustrate to lots of companies out there, is to say, well, look, this is a decent starting point. You've got those nice reference architecture diagrams. We've given you 3 reference architecture diagrams. Now go out and deploy it as you like. But yeah, I guess, like I say, the biggest gotcha for me has been the fact that you really need to understand what, it's that creative thinking, isn't it? What can I do? What can't I do? How do I set things up? And they are kind of, in my world, they're outside the technical bit, if that makes sense, Mert. It's more about understanding what your business needs, I guess.
Okay.
So on that note, it looks like we've completed, which is good, certainly for a demo. Great. So, okay, we've completed. Before I jump into the portal, what have I got left to do now? So if you remember, I had that pull request. I could have merged that pull request as I was doing that job, but I still haven't merged it effectively. So I'm going to finish off this merge request. Now, if you remember, we left that. It was doing these checks. And actually, when it was doing those checks, it was behind the scenes deploying it. So I could go into the portal. I would expect the change to be there. But all I'm going to do now is merge this pull request. It's going to move from my Ad UK West branch into my main branch. And I think part of this is that it will also, excuse me, it will also delete that branch for me. So I'm just going to confirm that merge. The world is golden. I've now just deployed adding my UK West data center into my policy. Okay, and this is where things take. So we had 6 locations originally. So if I refresh this, okay, and it's going to kick me out. I'm going to go back into it there. Look at wherever my assignment's gone. I've got to click on the right one. Bear with. Now locations. There we go. No, I'm still on the definition. Just make sure I'm on the right. Bad locations. There we go. And there we go. So I've now got 7 locations selected instead of 6. And my UK West region has been selected. So that's pretty much it for now, Mert, in terms of the demo. But hopefully that made a bit of sense. But and hopefully I kind of highlighted some of the key reasoning as to why this might be a good idea for your business, in the sense that you've now, it's not a case that you can just sort of click and point and work your way through. Just remember that, if I was working on my own VS Code here and, I kind of update and I pull that down to my local machine, so you can see instantaneously I'm using my VS Code. I've just got the up-to-date copy, which has got my UK West. I could absolutely be scanning through any of these areas. And I think if we expand that, we can see lots of policy assignments here if we just click through. But now I can programmatically manage my my definitions and my assignments through my VS Code on my machine. I can commit those to different branches, create pull requests via GitHub, and have those automatically update my my Azure tenant with the policies that I need. So on that note, I think the only thing left for me to show on the screen, if you bear with, is
may I ask you a question?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mert, yeah.
Are there any extensions required for running this stuff?
In VS Code?
Yeah, VS Code.
No, not really. Not at all. I mean, it's just all you've done here is you've cloned a GitHub repository to your local machine. So only the standard things that help you in VS Code. So any extensions or plugins that you need. There's nothing specifically needed for enterprise scale, Mert.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So, I mean, the only thing I was just going to put up on the screen is just a few quick links, just so people can see. And what I might do, if I send you these slides, you can paste these into any channels that you need to, if people want to get a look at them. Okay. But yeah, that's about it, Mert. So yeah, like I say, hopefully people will understand some of the good scenarios that this could be used from. And I've probably not done it justice. There's so much more that you can do. I'd urge anybody to go and have a little look at those URLs there, have a read, have a little play, get a little test area set up, and yeah, good luck with enterprise scale landing zones.
Okay, thank you very much. And this was an incredible session. And it is not possible to expect this from you, by the way. And before we finish, I want to share your YouTube channels.
Yeah, cool.
Post on chat, so the audience can grab the link and start following you on YouTube. And I really recommend following Johnny because he's creating great content for the community. Thank you very much again. It's a great session. And I hope to see you next year in new episodes for different topics.
You too, Mert. Yeah, I'll absolutely reach out to you. Have a great Christmas and New Year, Mert, and good luck for 2021.
Okay, you too. Have a great year. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks for having me, Mert. See you soon.
Okay, bye. See you.